Hi, Peter. Oscar had the speed already last year, but his race pace tyre management is improving a lot this year as well. Will you see him overtake, transcend the pace of Lando this or next year? Thanks. Well, I think they've got a very good team, McLaren. I'm not going to sidestep the question because you've asked a straight question. I don't think he will. No, I think Lando's got a wonderful rhythm to his driving, a great feel and softness to his driving and suppleness to his driving. The only thing he doesn't really have is the ability to think in terms of shortening the corner in the way that Max does or Lewis does, or indeed Oscar sometimes does and is trying to do. And that's why Oscar, I think, will be ahead of Lando reasonably consistently, not 50%, maybe 45% of the time, and has an advantage in on those days that Lando won't be able to match, because one good short corner driver will always beat one good longer corner driver. It's just a fact. Shorter bit of lap apart from anything else, and you're using the tyres less, you're using everything less, and it's a more efficient way to drive. You've got a bigger sweet spot in which to adapt to crosswinds, react to crosswinds and other variables. If you're a longer corner driver, you're always on the edge of what you're doing. You've got to brake as late as possible. You've got to get the power on as soon as possible, but not overload the car. You've got to make sure you miss this bump, that bump. And that's why you see Lando making mistakes sometimes under pressure in qualifying. Or indeed, maybe in the race, you could argue at Silverstone. He wasn't able to adapt his driving to what was going on in the turbulence of the Mercedes in front of him, Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes. And because of that, his tyre wear was greater. Whereas a shorter corner driver, if you've got the ability to drive with shorter corners, let's put it that way, it's not the short corners per se, it's the ability to create those. That means you've got a different feel to driving the car. You've got a much bigger sweet spot in which to adapt to things, whether it be turbulence from the car in front, oil, hitting the bump at the wrong angle, doing this, that. You've got a bigger sweet spot because the car is flatter and it's more stable. Because if it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to drive with short corners anyway. So that's where it is. I'm not saying that Oscar... So the question is, why wouldn't Oscar then blow Lando away at every race? Well, because Lando's still very, very good at a lot of other things. It's a little bit like comparing Daniel Ricciardo with Max Verstappen. And, you know, in the end, Daniel said, I've had enough of this, I'm out. But I think he made a mistake, because I think if Daniel had stayed at Red Bull, I think he would have won more races than Perez. I really do. And I think he would have... There was still some areas, even today, there are probably some areas where Daniel is better than Max. Every driver has his own qualities, and Lando's got some unbelievable feel, and as I keep saying, rhythm. It's a wonderful thing to have, is a rhythm to your driving, because it gives you a consistency that ramps up as the race develops. And that's very good, and he's proving to be extremely good in qualifying, isn't he? Really good at putting in the lap at the right moment. Very, very good. So yeah, good question. Thank you very much. It's always fun watching that whole. I think I said that from the start, didn't I? That the Lando Oscar comparison was going to be one of the highlights of the year, this year, next year for sure. It's an amazing team. And from McLaren's point of view, from a technical point of view, they've got the full gamut. They've got the longer corner driver with the incredible touch and feel, Lando Norris, and they've got the shorter corner driver who's very compact and very able to do a lot with the car, even when it's not quite right, which is great for the other end of the spectrum. And from the engineers, that's a really good thing to have. Brilliant thing to have. So yes, lots of questions. I'm just trying to see if there's any other super chats, because I don't want to... okay. Matthew Brown, thank you very much, Matthew. $9.99, very kind. Hello, Peter. Hope you're doing well. I'm still scratching my head at how the Red Bull had no pace through most of the race, and then suddenly the hard tyres and put on, and it's a rocket ship again. Yeah, it was a bit odd, wasn't it? It was a really, as I said in my video after the race, you can look at Max's performance as a glass half full or glass half empty. You could say, for a Red Bull, it wasn't very good, and they never got it right, and they didn't have a lot of grip. He did an unbelievable job still to bring that thing home in P2. Or you could say he had a very good car, quite capable of finishing P2, but what was he doing for half the race? He was half asleep, or 2/3 of the race. I mean, you've got to give Max the benefit of the doubt and say, I'm sure he wasn't half asleep. I've reread a few of the things he said and listened to a few things that he said, and he keeps going on about how there was very little grip and balance, and he was absolutely on the edge of pushing that car as hard as he could without having some sort of major off with it, which would suggest that they were not right in terms of tyre temperature, which may be a factor of the ride height they were running and not getting the car quite right. I mean, I've said a couple of times in mitigation of Red Bull's relatively poor performances over the last couple of months that their car is very good for the average of the circuit layouts in any given championship year. Let's say this year, 24 racetracks. But there are going to be racetracks where they're never going to have a car that's going to be perfect for that circuit, because the car inevitably is an engineering compromise, which in itself is a beautiful thing, but it's inevitably an engineering compromise. And if this circuit requires really, really good high-speed grip, then maybe it's not going to suit that car, and vice versa. I thought going into Silverstone that this would be one of the circuits that would be absolutely perfect for the Red Bull, the RB20. And I was very surprised that it wasn't. And I can only go back to that famous old chestnut of, given the relatively cold ambience and the difficult conditions, quite cold, everybody wearing jackets and pullovers, that they never got the tyres to work as well as McLaren obviously did, or Mercedes obviously did. They were the hardest of the range and the Pirelli compound, and they never got it to work. Now, why would that be? It could be because they have got more efficient downforce and they don't actually use the tyres as much in terms of in terms of scrubbing and slip angle on the tyre, which is maybe what the tyre needs in order to generate optimum tyre temperature. All of this is blackout stuff, and I don't think Red Bull, if we were to sit down tomorrow with any of the Red Bull people, Adrian, whatever, I'm not sure they would know exactly why they weren't super quick at Silverstone. I think it would have to be the relationship between the hardest in the range of the Pirelli tyres and the ambient temperatures and the track conditions. So yeah, and I wish it was more clear cut than that, but it isn't. And if it was, Red Bull would know, and they would have, been able to make the car a little bit quicker, I think. Now, as to why they were super quick at the end of the race, I think two things. One, Max was able, because they were the hard tyres, he was able to drive the thing as hard as he wanted to and needed to on a relatively light fuel load, and the track was dry and the sun was coming out, and all of a sudden he was starting to get some proper temperature and he could feel the car. I think it was that. Simultaneously, and it's a very important word, I think Lewis was obviously driving just within the edge of what he could do with the soft tyre, particularly on the left front. Very wary that it was not going to be easy to get that soft tyre through to the checkered flag, and therefore was never at the absolute limit of the car. And simultaneously, on top of that, Lando was initially in Lewis's turbulence, which did nothing for his ability to manage the tyres. And I think if Lando had not had that botched pit stop and had come out in the lead on the soft tyre, I think he would have won that race. I don't think his tyres would have gone off as much as they did, and I think he would have beaten Lewis. But because of the botched pit stop, he was behind Lewis and he was in the turbulence, and that's not a good thing, particularly on a high-speed, medium-speed circuit, or medium-speed corners, high-speed circuit, in terms of looking after the tyres. And I think it was that. And because of that all going on, Max on the hard tyre he knew that tyre was going to last for the next 100 years, and he just went for it on a dry track. And obviously the car gave him more feel. He didn't feel as if he was on the edge of a razor blade all the time driving the thing. I think that's what happened. But a lot of it is tyre related. We shouldn't forget how sensitive these cars are because of the ride heights they're in and how difficult it is to get the cars to work, the car to work in terms of the downforce, the bouncing, the compound, the ambient. It's a difficult thing. It's not easy, as Red Bull are proving right now. Hello, Peter. I noticed the whole weekend Lewis Hamilton was faster than George Russell on Sector 2, except in qualifying. So in general, Lewis was faster by my observation, but in qualifying he lost to George. Why do you think that happened? Well, I think George, as I say, that whole section there, Lewis was superb. But when you're on a new set of soft Pirellis and the car's just about as good as you can get it, I think George is very, very good, and he's not going to make mistakes. He's going to get the best from that lap, and he did. But when he's on mediums that have done 5 laps, or he's on a full or a heavy fuel load run, then the Lewis way of just letting the car float a bit more and just being a bit more gentle with everything will always, and more stability in shorter corners, will be better. And I think it's just that one. It's the same with any long corner driver, any driver who's a bit spiky but very, very good in terms of car control and balance and feel. Then give them a new set of soft tyres, pretty good balance. They're always going to be mega quick for one lap, no doubt. Ronnie Peterson, but that isn't just the weekend, isn't it? It's not just one lap. So that's what happened there. I think in general, Lewis had this looser feel to the car of what he was doing, and everything was very square and very nice in the way he was running the car. Beautiful to watch. Is Red Bull sacrificing the second seat for development time? They have quite a high chance of going 4th or even 5th in the Constructors. What do I think about that? I don't know. I don't really think about the Constructors' Championship very much. I only think about the drivers. Oh, you're not allowed to say that. You have to say the Constructors' Championship's so important. And I know it is from a money point of view, but they've all got too much money anyway. So, yeah, I'm only thinking of the Drivers' Championship. And if you want to win the Drivers' Championship, which was the Michael Schumacher philosophy, you give me Rubens Barrichello in the other car, or Eddie Irvine, or Felipe Massa. I don't want Mika Hakkinen, thank you very much. And he was right. Every point counts, and that's what the Red Bull thing is. So, yeah, the constructors thing, maybe they'd be scoring more points right now. But as I say, just wait up and just wait and see. I can't imagine Perez will be slow in Hungary. If he is slow in Hungary, then he needs to stop, I think, because it's not going to be a very difficult circuit for him. Rauo, probably Brazilian. And, yeah. Do you think Frank Williams' humble beginnings made him stand out in the Formula One paddock, and why was he so driven? That's a good question. Humble beginnings. He went to a very, very strict Jesuit boarding school, like Carlos Reutemann. They had that in common, interestingly enough. And I think that made Frank a bit of an introvert and very, very disciplined, very self-disciplined. And we saw that throughout his life with first of all, with his running and his commitment to racing, I say foot running, marathons, and then post-accident with his mental strength and auto-suggestion of not allowing himself to wallow in self-pity. And all of that comes under the heading of self-discipline and being incredibly strict with your regime. So that's the Frank I knew. Why was he so committed to racing? Because he didn't believe in doing it less than 100%. Holidays were an intrusion that he objected to. Having to go to cocktail parties with fellow team principals over the Christmas break was something he did not enjoy. And if he had to go, he would make sure he got there late so he could be the last to park, so that if he wanted to leave early, he could get in his car and go, and he wouldn't have to wait for somebody else to move their car. Everything was like that with Frank. And if he was driving to Heathrow from Didcot, he would set the stopwatch to see if he could beat the previous best time. He was just like that. That was his makeup, and I don't think it was any different. Just total commitment, and that endeared him to a lot of racing people, because they just saw this guy that was out there 100% committed to racing. When you think about the Temporada series, Formula 2, he's doing that with Piers Courage. He's doing like 5 races in Argentina and, well, mainly Argentina, Colombia, and a couple of other countries. Racing every weekend. And in the middle of that, in the days of Boeing 707s, Frank gets on a plane on a Monday with a gearbox as his cabin baggage, flies back to England, goes to Hewland, gets the rebuild, flies back on the Thursday for the gearbox to be at the track on the Friday. I mean, and that was just normal life for Frank. And I think I don't think he enjoyed the Sunday afternoons when he wasn't racing and he had to sit there having a Sunday lunch somewhere. It just wasn't his thing. He would go back to the office and make phone calls and get on with racing. He just just a pure racer. You couldn't have, there's no better word to describe Frank Williams than racer. So it wasn't humble beginnings. It was just this incredibly strict regime in which he lived his life, running, diet, everything. And as for the passion, it all started at the British Grand Prix 58 when he hitchhiked to Silverstone as a kid and ducked under the fence and saw Peter Collins win the British Grand Prix. Blonde-haired Englishman in a Ferrari. And Frank was already very patriotic with his upbringing and, with his upbringing, I guess. Family, probably. Very patriotic. And the sight of Peter Collins winning that race, that British Grand Prix in a Ferrari, was just ignited this flame inside Frank Williams. Dudemeister. Question. Hi Peter, do you reckon great modern Formula One drivers would do well in the past too and vice versa? Or are these generations different beasts altogether? Well, it's a question of whether Tazio Nuvolari would be able to master active diffs, brake balance controls and all the mixture settings and stuff they have on the car, and conversely whether Max Verstappen would be good at heel and toeing and changing gear with a gear lever between his legs. So that's I'm being stupid, aren't I? But it's kind of the reality, isn't it? There's so much difference between those eras. Obviously those drivers were what they were in those eras, but if you took a driver of Nuvolari's talent and he was 12-year-old now, but he had exactly the same DNA as Nuvolari, and put him in a kart and then took him up, for sure he'd be a world champion, for sure. And equally Max, if you put Max in an Auto Union team and had he grown up in that era, he would be just as good as Herman Lang. It's quite funny to think about, isn't it? Even funnier to think about if Tazio Nuvolari was on Twitter and what he would tweet to Achille Varzi and vice versa. Hey, what you do now tonight, eh? Where we go? Yeah, I'm busy. I'm in my room. M. Arshad Zahangir Chowdhury. Hello there. Mr. Windsor, what are the similarities in Max's mentality and driving style with that of Michael Schumacher's? How would you rate Michael's rain driving with Michael's? I'll make sure my cap's straight, is it? It's even more crooked now. That way. There we go. Yeah, they both are very good at knowing what they need from a car in order to drive that car at its maximum, given the shortcomings that any car has. So if you list the shortcomings of any car, poor traction, not very good turn-in, it's not very quick in a straight line, whatever it might be, and you put them in, you said to Max and you said to Michael, which ones of these do you want to eliminate? Which ones can we live with in order to do the lap that we got to do tomorrow in qualifying? Both of them are extremely good at knowing what they can impart to a car, make up for, providing the engineers get that little problem solved. So yeah, we've got to have a little bit less rear flap because we've got to have a more top speed. I know that's going to give us more oversteer going into that medium speed corner, but if I do this, I know I can do that, and blah, blah, blah. And that's when they're absolutely spot on, because they're absolutely at the limit of what a human being can do in that car. And they know what can be done and what can't be done. And that's what makes them different. And in that sense, Michael is no different from Max, who's no different from Lewis, who's no different from Nigel Mansell, who's no different from Jim Clark or Sterling Moss. I think Michael was more interested in the overall, in people and the overall picture, and he was quite capable of putting a race team together, as we saw with Jean Todt and Ross Brawn, and a lot of those people Michael wanted and chose and ran, and Michael was very good at when the situation arose with McLaren on Bridgestone and winning races in 98 and 99, winning the championship indeed. Michael was very good at turning that around and getting Bridgestone effectively to supply Ferrari exclusively, and getting McLaren onto Michelin along with all the other teams, and giving him sort of 5 years exclusive with Bridgestone. That was a Michael classic, and that's typical of what Michael's ability was. I don't think Max has that sort of global picture, political, business-like picture. He's much more of just a raw racing driver who wants a very quick racing car. He's very good at getting the best from that racing car. But if you said to Max, okay, you can go to Ferrari, it's a clean sheet of paper, you can bring with whoever you like from Red Bull or any other team that you want, put the team together, it's your team. I'm sure he'd say Adrian Newey, but I'm not sure he would know how to put all that together and make it work in a completely new environment in the way Michael did, taking people from Benetton to Ferrari. So I think they're the differences. The similarities, as I say, is the way they did that. In terms of the actual driving of the car, pretty similar. And I don't think Max is any less of a wet weather driver than Michael was. As good as Michael was in the wet, I think Max is just as good in the wet. Because you can't be as good as either of them were in the way they use short corners and the way they balance a car and the stability of the platform they could generate. You can't do those things unless you've got unbelievable touch and feel and rhythm. And if you got that, you're quick in the wet. You can feel the grip and you know what you're doing. So there's no magic to the wet other than it's feeling the grip and knowing exactly where to go. Oh no, that hasn't got grip there. We'll try it. Oh yeah, that's good. Now how much load, how quickly can we go on that bit where there is the grip? That's the art. It's one thing to know where the grip is. It's another then to maximize that grip and not go over the top either. Steve T. Hi Peter, do you think it's time Oscar looked for a new team? It seems McLaren ruin his race time and time again. It seems they want one in the team. Well, I don't think it's deliberate, and I think they would love to see Oscar win a Grand Prix. And I think McLaren have made it pretty clear that if they both end up with 10 laps to go on the same strategy, the same tyres are exactly the same life, then they're free to race. And I think that's pretty clear. Unless, of course, the championship is starting to loom for Lando. And I think that's a good thing. McLaren have done a very good job there in allowing them to race. And I think Oscar will win some races soon. I've no doubt about that. Would he be better in another team? I mean, it's interesting to think what would have happened had he just done what he was announced to be doing. In other words, driven for Alpine, as he was announced as the race driver for Alpine alongside Esteban Ocon. Had he done that, he would have been showing up Ocon, I think, and he would be on everybody's list. And maybe he would have gone to Ferrari instead of Lewis, maybe. Or maybe he would be going to Mercedes now alongside George, if he was at Alpine. But because he's got a long-term commitment to McLaren, and obviously he owes McLaren a lot for the team he's with and the car he's got and doing what they did, that isn't going to happen. But it's interesting to think that he might have been in a better position by now had he gone to Alpine, stayed at Alpine. He says it's 7 championship, quit crying over it already. The Singapore 08 will not be over 10, nor will Abu Dhabi 21. Yeah, but what about Kyalami 81? That needs to be... We need to start in chronological order. Actually, I think we need to look back at the 58 World Championship. I still think Stirling Moss should be given equal title to that with Mike Hawthorn for giving Mike Hawthorn the point that enabled him to win the championship. He did that in the previous race in Portugal. It wasn't for Stirling, Mike wouldn't have had that extra point. So I think we start from there. Give Stirling equal status on winning that championship, with sharing it with Mike in 58. We'll do that. Then we have to move forward to, well, you could say 64 Mexican Grand Prix, Ferrari, Bandini taking out Graham Hill. Maybe we should give Graham that championship. Although it was good to have John win it, so maybe we'll give Graham equal billing there as well. Then we fast forward to 81, where for sure Carlos Reutemann should be world champion. And then we give Massa the 08 World Championship because of Singapore Gate. And everybody starting the race, a lot of people starting the race knowing what was going to happen. So it was an illegal race, if you like. And what was the other one you got there? Abu Dhabi 21. Oh, Abu Dhabi 21. There you go. Lewis. Kevin Pryor, would have loved to have seen Dan Weldon and Dario Franchitti in Formula One. Yeah, so would we all. Dan, Justin Wilson, no longer with us. But you know what? I have no doubt that Tony Stewart and Jeff Gordon would have been really good in Formula One. And there were moments in the careers of both those drivers when they were happy and they would have been ready to have come over to Europe and got into Formula One had they been offered a proper year in Formula 2, paid drive, and testing in Formula One, and do it the correct way, not just jumping in to see how well they went. Obviously, they need to be nurtured. But both of those guys, enormous talent, and both of them, I knew them both very well at that stage of their careers, and both of them would have been ready to have come to Formula One, and both of them had the talent. Just Tripathi, but it didn't. I remember that Jeff Gordon was almost ready to do something with Frank Williams, and because Bernie was a bit lukewarm about it, and Frank didn't really know whether he really could do it, it just all petered out. And he drove the Williams in that demo thing he did at Indy, loved it. He would have been good. I mean, Jeff Gordon's a real star. Scott Dixon's another that would have done incredibly well in Formula One had he been given the opportunity. Yash Tripathi, hey Peter, your analysis is very profound and helpful from a technical standpoint. As a request, could you please make an analysis video on types of driving styles with driver examples in the future? Yeah, I'll do my best. I've done a few videos about that, haven't I? Why Max brakes early but he's still quick, and short corners, what they're all about, and things like that. I've done quite a lot, but I'll continue to do it. I mean, it's what I love, and it's what I love seeing. And regardless of where Formula One goes with its technology, the difference between the drivers will always be there, and that's what I think is the most fascinating thing. I'm not massively into whether or not this rear flap is slightly different from that rear flap. I find all that slightly tedious, but the difference between Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo, yeah, I can look at that all day. And like X, someone who works in technology and data with AI, which team would it be good to apply to work for? At Peter Windsor. It's interesting. I sat next to a guy about 5 years ago on a flight to somewhere, can't remember where. Nice guy. And I think he was reading Autosport or something, so I thought, strike up a conversation. And I'm just looking here to see if I've got his name here. I probably haven't. Yeah, I've still got his name here and his number. And we struck up a conversation. And I said, oh, wow, have you... And anyway, it turned out he used to work at Toro Rosso. And he'd left Toro Rosso. I said, why? And he said, oh, because my speciality is AI, and that's not going anywhere in Formula One, so I'm going into industry, and I'm going to be working for some other big company, and that was it. And I remember, and I had a bit of a chat saying, are you sure AI is not going to be a thing in Formula One at some point? And he said, well, I keep pushing it, and I keep telling them to do it, but they just don't seem to listen, and I just think they're going to be so negative about it. Isn't that amazing? And now everybody's saying AI. So I would say not Toro Rosso, or as it now is, Visa Cash App. I would not go there, Bear Like X. But any of the other teams, I'd say McLaren would probably be pretty forward thinking. And so would Mercedes, I guess. Yeah, I'd send a letter to Piers Thin, Thyne, at McLaren. Don't mention my name, because he'll probably say, oh, Windsor, getting all these people to write in, got to open all these letters. But send a letter, write it in ink, a proper letter with a stamp, because then it'll stand out straight away, and it might make its way there. May not, of course. They probably don't have enough post box at McLaren anymore, but it might. It's always worth trying. See you again very soon. Stay safe.